Hello everybody, you have tuned in to Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover virtually any aspect of making a murderer. I go over the evidence, the documents, the photos. So if you like, stay tuned, and in the future I'll have many more videos besides the one you're about to see. Hello everybody. So this is going to be part 3 of the Illinois versus Jesus Sanchez. So this is going to be some more of the particulars, and basically the more finer points that the appellate judges in Illinois had with the case. So here we go. We'll move right into it. Now we're going to move into the documents that finally came from the rehab center that Mr. Flores was in during the trial. He had gotten busted or whatever. He was in a rehab. He was inpatient, and so he was having to do meetings and therapy and things like that as part of his recovery. Well, those records were requested at the beginning of trial, and the defense was very eager to get their hands on them. And the defense was asking for continuations because for some reason the rehab center was having trouble getting the documents together and getting them over to the court. So the defense continued to ask for continuations because they were waiting to be able to know what kind of defense they could really run, and they wanted to know what happened with Mr. Flores over at rehab, because they knew that most likely if he was in rehab and they were kind of breaking him down and trying to get him off drugs, and so he was probably going to be doing he's going to be speaking kind of raw and from the heart, and if they could get the documents from there, and that there might be some information there that could help Jesus Sanchez. And so that was the whole point, and she was waiting for it. And eventually the judge told her, because the rehab center was just taking too long, and the judge obviously had the bias that he had, he basically just said, you know what, we're not waiting anymore, that's it, we're moving forward, and blah, blah, blah. But eventually, by the end of trial, they all showed up. And that's what you heard it talking about, that when the jury went into deliberation, she put forth a motion talking about that the evidence was not proper, and that the note that she found inside of the rehab center, the doctor from the rehab center had written about having a conversation with Mr. Flores, and Mr. Flores said, that that basically, well, actually that part's coming up actually, but he says that the person who was on trial for this was not the murderer, and he knows he's going to have to go in to testify again, and I guess he's probably kind of stressing out over it, and that's probably why this note got made in the doctor's notes. But he was stressing out, and he's saying the guy that really did it they're not even looking at him. They don't even care. They're completely ignoring him. And this is just a statement that Flores was making to a doctor in a rehab clinic. I mean, he couldn't have thought that this was going to somehow make it into court. So he was, making this statement because he wanted to, he was trying to help his friend, because he knew that if he said it at rehab, it would get into court. That doesn't work. So he was just at rehab, soul searching and trying to, find a way to stay clean or whatever it is, because that's what it is when you're at rehab. Even the people that are there that don't want to try to stay clean, they go through the motions while they're there so that they can get out. And so they do, and it's because they go through the motions while they're there. That's how these places help people get clean, because through multiple times or multiple stays or multiple programs, those people eventually piece together things that they were able to learn by going through the motions that they were forced to go through at these programs, that they're able to finally piece together an entire picture for themselves to stay sober. And so that could be what was happening with Mr. Flores. He may not have been there fully, looking to get sober at that time, but he was there having to go through the motions, having to, speak candidly and openly and honestly about things. And so that was what was going on when he's there. That's just the way that those places work. So I know somebody that is somebody close to me that is a drug and alcohol counselor and works in those kind of places. So that's how I know. So anyway, we'll move into the next bit now, where we basically hear about this note that was written by the doctor of the rehab center where Mr. Flores went while the trial was happening. Defense counsel filed a motion for a new trial, listing numerous alleged trial errors. She also contended that the judge committed reversible error when he denied her request for a continuance so that the parties could have the records of Flores' stay at the rehabilitation center. The records from the rehabilitation center, produced after trial and appended to the motion for a new trial, included a note from Flores' therapist which said, "Client is expecting to be called back into court to testify again. Client reported that the guy currently on trial did not commit the murder. Client reported that he knows who did it, along with several other witnesses who have told the authorities about it. However, right now, the current guy is locked up and has been incarcerated for the past year." Defense counsel did not have access to this note when she prepared for trial and when she cross-examined Flores, Beachkey, and other witnesses. The judge denied the motion for a new trial. The judge sentenced Sanchez to 45 years in prison, 20 years for murder, plus 25 years for use of a firearm. Sanchez now appeals. Which, use of a firearm, which there is no GSR. There's no proof that he fired any weapon that night, or usually what I've always heard is that pretty much no matter, even if you wash your hands, that gunshot residue sticks around for at least like maybe 3 days. I think that's what I've heard, but I know it's longer than a day. And so yeah, the suggestion that it might have been rubbed off or whatever is really kind of ridiculous. Okay, so yeah, are we really surprised about the judge denying her motion there? He'd been so biased the whole time anyways. Are we? I mean, it's not really shocking that he denied it. But you can tell the appeals court didn't care much for it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put it in there. So, anyways. So, now, we're going to move on from that. Obviously, where we have Mr. Flores in rehab saying that Mr. Sanchez did not do it. And that he's been held on, unjustly for over a year. He's on trial for it. And that the guy that did do it is, living scot-free, apparently. So, I mean, how messed up is that? That's always the problem with these wrongful convictions. And cops want to say, "Oh, yeah, it'd be so hard on us." No, well, the problem is that when you ignore what the evidence is telling you and you make a wrongful conviction, not only are you putting an innocent person in prison that doesn't belong there, but you're leaving a very dangerous guilty person out on the streets to commit more crimes. So it's not about putting dishonor on law enforcement and whatever, all that crap that you heard from the prosecutor in this case. It's not about that. It's about justice. That's protect and serve. That is what law enforcement does. I mean, come on. That's the point of you. And when you're not doing that, it's going to be called into question. Sorry, I don't know what else to frickin' say. If you can't do your job right, then it's going to get questioned. That's the way of the world. If a plumber comes into your house and to fix something, but it doesn't get fixed, but he charges you $500 for it, are you going to have an issue with him? Are you going to be calling him to get his butt back out there to fix it right so that the problem you called him out for originally is fixed? And you're not having that same problem that you called him out for and paid him $500 to fix? Right? That's the nature of the world. If you don't do your job correctly, it's possible that you're going to get called into question. That's Dunce 101, really. Anybody would know that. It's just, a no-brainer. So I didn't care for seeing the way the prosecutor was acting there, talking about, to the jury about putting dishonor on these gentlemen and blah, 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 who are out there putting their lives on the line. Yeah, okay. You know what? They're probably going to be continuing to put their lives on the line, Mr. Prosecutor, so long as they keep going after innocent people and leaving the guys that are out there shooting people on the street. Yeah, that puts them in more danger, Mr. Prosecutor, in case you didn't realize that. So, now we're going to move into the fact where the judges point out that there's no physical evidence in this case against Sanchez. There's zero physical evidence in any way that ties Sanchez to this case, which, you know, and it's just another one of the list of their things. And who does that parallel, folks? Who do we know that parallels? Mr. Brendan Dassey. You know, Mr. Brendan Dassey has the same situation, where the only thing that there is to use against him is the coerced confession that was painfully and awkwardly extracted from him by a couple of investigators who were convinced of their theory of things and fed that theory to a, you know, limited 16-year-old kid and bullied him into spitting it back as a confession. And that's where we're at with that. So, I mean, that's the parallels that we see here, because they were using the same tactics on Mr. Sanchez that they used on that Fassbender and Wiegert used on Brendan. Very many of the same tactics. Only thing is that, you know, Mr. Sanchez was a lot more vocal about the fact that he wanted out of there. He wanted to see his mother. He wanted to talk to his mother. Well, he was very, very, very insistent about it. And I think that it's a good thing that he was doing that, because it worked out in his advantage. I think anybody out there with kids probably needs to tell their kids that if they ever find themselves in a situation with the cops like that, questioning them and stuff, and that they're not around and that they don't know where, you know, mom and dad is, that they need to be very vocal and very insistent and repeatedly state that they want their mom and dad. They don't want to be there. They don't, you know, those things, to make that like a litany of the things that they're saying anytime that they find themselves in that situation. So I think that's what all parents should do to help protect their kids, because I think it worked in Mr. Sanchez's advantage that, you know, he was asking repeatedly, and that may only be because his mom was in surgery and he was just really worried about her and was hoping she was okay and that she made it through the surgery. I mean, that could totally be. And maybe normally Mr. Sanchez wouldn't have been that insistent to talk to his mother, but the fact is he was insistent. And when you watch those officers denying him, it was in my first video. If you guys watched that one. With all basically the backstory of, you know, the sequence of events, but they were working him over basically. So that's where we're at with that. So we're gonna move in now, like I said, where the fact that there is no physical evidence against Mr. Sanchez in any way that ties into these crimes, and how witness accounts along with that, you know, lead to the fact that they believe the prosecution completely got this wrong and didn't meet their burden. So here we go. Sufficiency of the evidence. No physical evidence connected Sanchez to the crime. Sound familiar, folks? Police never found the gun or the casings from the fired bullets, and they found only one of the 4 fired bullets. The prosecutor conceded that police never found the bullet that killed Orozco. A reasonable trier of fact could conclude that the many persons found near the scene, including those persons who, according to police, acted with hostility to the police, may have taken from the area the evidence before police arrived on the scene. No witness testified that Sanchez held a gun. No witness saw Sanchez on Equestrian Drive, where the shots came from. Sanchez's hands and clothes bore no trace of antimony, no trace of barium, and no trace of lead. The testimony of all witnesses and all physical evidence fits well with the initial account Sanchez, Flores, Estrada, Leslie, and others gave police. That account, which matched Flores' testimony in court, is also consistent with Miguel's testimony that he stood on Bridle Trail talking to Sanchez and others before he left with Rodriguez to head to the 490 building where Pettibone lived. When Sanchez and others realized the shots hit someplace near the 490 building, they had reason to fear that Miguel had been shot. Moreover, the prosecution failed to present a coherent theory of the case. According to the prosecution, Sanchez went home to pick up his gun sometime after the fight with Edson at 3:30 p.m. He spent the rest of the afternoon and evening with Miguel and other friends, getting into a confrontation with some Serranos after Edson went to the Serranos for help. But Edson according to the prosecution's witnesses, flipped from the Mennonite Latin disciples to the Spanish gangster disciples. The Sureños count both of those gangs as enemies. Inexplicably, Edson did not appeal to the Spanish gangster disciples, which is the gang that he now belonged to. So, I mean, yeah, that's a pretty, damning kind of point there. Yeah, I mean, what the heck? Why would this guy be going to people of a gang that he's never been in, asking them for help, instead of going to his own gang members for help? Right? So, okay. So, yeah, that makes as much sense as a screen door on a submarine. The prosecution's theory, anyway. The overwhelming implausibility of the prosecution's account presents us with the question, why did a jury of 12 ostensibly reasonable persons sign a verdict convicting Sanchez of murder? We find two factors that likely led to the verdict. First, confessions have exceptional pervasive force, and, as we have already concluded, the jury should not have heard Sanchez's incriminating statements. Second, the prosecutor insinuated that Sanchez's hands had gunshot residue, and the Sureños accused him of shooting Orozco, and the prosecutor shifted the jury's focus from evidence against Sanchez to the issues of whether the defense counsel had grievously insulted police and whether jurors doubted the integrity of the officers. We note that if not for the constraints imposed on detectives by section of 103.21b of the code, the video recording requirement, the detectives would have had much better opportunity to obtain signatures of Sanchez and Flores on statements more consistent with the physical evidence, making the statements more plausible, no less false and no less coerced. We recommend that if police departments again use the so-called presumptive GSR test, the departments should inform officers and the subjects of the test about what the tests actually measure and what kinds of contact can produce positive results. We also recommend that the consideration of possible sanctions against the officers for violating Section 103-3 of the Code, which establishes the suspect's right to make phone calls. While our Supreme Court has expressly approved the use of deception to obtain confessions, this case shows us how the use of deception in interrogations leads to false confessions. Deceptive practices contribute to an atmosphere in which whole communities act with hostility toward police. If police want the members of the community to treat them with respect and help them in their efforts to reduce crime, police should renounce the use of deceptive practices in law enforcement so that the members of the community learn that they can trust police officers to treat them honestly. The practice of deception in interrogations and other settings can destroy the trust needed as a foundation for the relationship between police officers and the members of the communities. The police officers have a duty to serve and protect. A revision of police department rules, an actual imposition of insignificant sanctions for deceptions might help repair the strained relations between police and some of the communities and that they have duty to serve. No witness saw Sanchez with a gun. This is the conclusion, by the way. So no witness saw Sanchez with a gun. No witness saw Sanchez near the spot from which the fatal shot came. The prosecution showed no connections between Sanchez and the single spent bullet found at the scene. Police found no trace of antimony, barium, or lead on Sanchez's hands or clothes. The prosecutor did not present a plausible account of Sanchez's actions around the time of the shooting, and police admitted that Sanchez and the persons with him shortly before the shooting gave a plausible, consistent, exonerating account of Sanchez's conduct. We hold that the prosecution did not present sufficient evidence to sustain the conviction, but here the record leads to a further conclusion. The evidence convincingly shows that Sanchez did not murder Orozco. Accordingly, we have reversed the judgment of the trial court, and it's reversed. So that's what happens there, folks. They weren't playing around. They saw some of the issues with this, and like I say, you were listening, or you were seeing
how many of those issues have so many common seams or common threads with Brendan and Steven? I find that the particular bargaining with that the jury most had to have done there to come up with, after being split, then suddenly it comes back with yes, guilty for murder but not guilty for the attempted murder. Just like Steven's trial. It's just so many things I thought were just very interesting with this. But anyway.
So there you see, the Illinois Appellate Court is no longer playing games when it comes to juveniles or deceptive practices from law enforcement. They're not digging it. And when you couple it with everything that was involved with this case, like they said, the severe implausibility of the prosecution's narrative, basically, or theory, just everything involved, all of the coercive tactics used on Mr. Sanchez and Mr. Flores, the judge. Look at what the judge was doing in this case. He clearly, his compass was pointing north, way north. You know what I mean? For people that don't know what I mean when I say that, it's how law enforcement and large groups of law enforcement all get together and do something. They end up working together for something that ends up not being correct, but they all end up coming together and working on it together because they're all together. They're all in on it. They're all in together, and so if a couple of them feel that one person is guilty of this, then the rest of them just kind of fall in line. It's kind of like just a knee-jerk reaction. It's not something that they really do consciously so much. It's just that they back their own brothers, and when that happens, that's what it means for all compasses pointing north, because they're in a predisposition to do that. The fact that this judge was being biased and his compass was pointing so crazy, true north, is a little bit disturbing, because our justice system is set up in a certain way to hopefully try to catch wrongful convictions, to try to mitigate the number of innocent people that we put in prison. And this judge was clearly just on board with railroading this kid, because not waiting for that stuff from the rehab center, allowing the prosecutor to address the defendant directly at his defense table. Things like that. It's just like, wow, this case was really out there. But all the parallels that it has to Steven and Brendan is just, that the jury thing where they came out and said they were split. They sent a notice to the judge saying, we're split. We don't know, we can't resolve this. And the judge just says, keep deliberating. And then somehow, mysteriously, in 5 hours, the jury comes back with guilty of murder, but not guilty of attempted murder. So, it's like what happened with Steven. It was like a bargain, So I found that to be quite interesting, because the way that it ended up, everybody believes that it went with Steven's jury, is that those that were in there that were, actual blood relation to members of law enforcement were in there and wouldn't budge. So eventually they made a deal where they said they would vote, everybody would vote guilty of murder, but then everybody was going to vote not guilty of mutilation of a corpse. And I think that's a sign in these times of a jury that is in distress, in my opinion. So I think that was interesting that was happening here as well. So, and like I said, this case, these appellate judges in Illinois are basically saying, you know what, we don't want this anymore. We don't want this kind of crap. They realize that there's a lot here for people to have a bone to pick with. And I get the feeling right now that the Illinois Appellate Court is putting their foot down, going, no, that's it. You know what? Law enforcement, prosecutors, everybody, you need to conduct yourself in a certain way. The empirical data is telling us that these deceptive methods only work against us, that only work against law enforcement, and and they're just putting their foot down, and they're trying to make send a message to get everybody to just clean it up. We gotta look at the writing on the wall. We gotta see which way the wind is blowing. We gotta see what the empirical data is telling us. So that's about it here. This is part 3. And if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you later.